This video is best viewed on a full screen at 1080p quality. Click the gear at the lower right corner of the video window. Next, click the quality option. And finally, select 1080p. I'm projecting all of the images in a dimly lit room rather than a dark room. For this, I'm using two shaded lamps placed about 12 feet diagonally from the center of the screen, and each lamp has a small 15-watt chandelier bulb in it. The ambient light in the room measures 4 lumen at the center of the screen. So the two most important factors in your home theater are obviously the projector and the screen, and that's why I want to quickly mention the type of screen I'm projecting onto. In this case, it's a Spandex projector screen instead of the more typical blackout material. There are several advantages to this type of screen, one of which it can attach to a $30 backdrop stand. It's easy to do. You just take some 5 spring clips and you attach the screen to the backdrop stand. And this can be used outdoors in your backyard, or take it with you camping or to a party. And the screen I have here is made in the USA by Stretch Screen USA. It's available on Amazon for around $80, which is actually less than a do-it-yourself fixed frame type screen. You don't have to buy wood, corner brackets, staples, and actually build the frame as you do with that type of frame. The other advantage is that you don't need a permanent empty wall space. For example, the situation I have here is a little awkward to put up a fixed frame screen because I have a staircase in the way. But with the Spandex projector screen, that's not a problem. It literally only takes 30 seconds to put up this screen. Right here, we're all halfway done already. It just simply attaches to 5 small hooks that are in the ceiling, and you can barely see them. And the corner brackets, the bottom corners, attach with a bungee to something as simple as a water jug or whatever you want to use for that. And there you have it. The screen is completely up. So here you can see the Spandex projector screen produces a really good image, but that's only half the story. Check this out. If we pick up our camera and walk around behind the screen, you can see that the Spandex projector screen can also act as a backlight screen. That's like getting 2 screens in one. No other type of projector screen can do this. Now, buyer beware, you may be tempted to go with a cheaper knockoff version from China, but go with the one made in the USA. It's Amazon's choice, even at a higher price, and it has 147 reviews so far, where the cheap one only has 3 reviews, which can easily be faked. So here's the Amazon product page of the Spandex projector screen that I have, and they have images along the left. As you can see, it's a much cleaner design instead of sewn crooked and all that, and the fabric is a much higher quality. It's a tighter weave, which will give you better colors and a sharper image. And here is a real-world example of that. I have the 2 screens hung side by side, with the Made in the USA one on the left and the Chinese knockoff version on the right. And you can really see the difference in the color quality, the brightness, the saturation. And if you look at this next image here, you can actually see how much detail you lose in the smoke due to the looser weave of the cheaper fabric. Here's the product page one more time, and I put a link in the description to make it easy for you. Alright, let's get going. Compare our projectors. Here you can see the size comparison between the DBPower T20 budget projector with a claimed brightness of 1800 lumen and a resolution of 800 by 480, and the RIF6 Cube pico projector with a brightness of 50 lumen and a similar 854 by 480 resolution. Our first comparison here is a simple white image to compare the brightness. As you can see, the 50 lumen RIF6 Cube is just as bright as the so-called 1800 lumen DBPower T20. Here we're zooming in to compare the pixels. Here's some simple colored squares, and the RIF6 Cube has slightly stronger colors than the DBPower T20. This next slide you may want to pause on. This is the actual lumen measurement of each colored square. This was done in a completely dark room as opposed to a dimly lit room like all our other slides were shot in. And zooming in to compare the color pixels. Here's a simple color gradient, and the RIF6 Cube colors are more saturated than the T20s. And here's a more advanced color gradient for comparison. The RIF6 Cube has a smoother transition between some of the colors. And here's some colored smoke on a white background. The RIF6 Cube has slightly better details, even though they have similar resolutions. And we'll zoom in to compare that more closely. Here's the colored smoke on a black background. The DBPower T20 has better highlight details in this image. And let's zoom in to compare that here. Here's a highlight and shadow gradient. The DBPower T20 has a blue tint and the highlight details are not quite as good. Zooming in, we can see the blue tint of the T20 projector. You'll notice the DBPower T20 squeezes the image, making the face appear more narrow. And let's zoom in on this one to compare the details. Here we'll compare the highlights. And the RIF6 Cube is sharper and it does not have the blue tint that the DBPower T20 has. Here's a good image for shadow comparison. Similar shadow details from each projector. And zooming in. Here we'll compare highlights and shadows in a single image. The RIF6 Cube is slightly better. Here we'll compare the resolution with some grid patterns. Neither projector reproduces the grid pattern accurately. Some of the lines are thicker and some are thinner. When we zoom in, we can see that here. Here's another grid pattern for comparison. Both projectors seem to enlarge and crop the edges of the image slightly. And let's zoom in on that to compare the details. Here's some black grids on a white background. The RIF6 Cube is slightly better at reproducing the grid pattern. And we'll zoom in on this one to compare that more closely. And reversing that, a white grid on a black background, the RIF6 Cube once again is slightly better. And when we zoom in, we can see the RIF6 Cube is better focus as well. Here we'll compare the text quality. The RIF6 Cube produces more legible text with better contrast. And we'll zoom in on that to compare that more closely. Here we'll compare some skin tones. The RIF6 Cube, lighter skin tones have a yellow tint to them. And let's zoom in to compare that. And a few more faces for comparison. The RIF6 Cube produces smoother looking faces. And we'll zoom in to compare that here. Here we'll do a color comparison. The RIF6 Cube has better colors, more saturated. And let's zoom in to compare the details. Here's a similar image for comparison. Once again, the RIF6 Cube has slightly better colors. Here is a lower contrast foggy image. The RIF6 Cube has a little more contrast than the DBPower T20, producing a better image. And here we'll compare the colors on the bird. You'll notice the difference in the yellow tones from each projector. And here's a good night scene. Fairly similar image from both projectors. And we'll zoom in on that to compare the details. Here's a good high contrast image. Fairly similar images once again from both projectors. And we can zoom in on this one as well. Here we'll compare the contrast with this image. The RIF6 Cube has slightly more contrast. Here zooming in. Here's a dimly lit scene. Fairly similar quality between the two projectors. And we'll zoom in to compare the pyramids here. Here's a sunset scene for comparison. Slight color difference between the two projectors, but nothing drastic. And here's a bridge lit up at night. Similar quality, and there's slight color differences if you look at the road there. And we can zoom in to compare the details, fairly similar in that aspect as well. Here's another night shot. The RIF6 Cube has a little more contrast. And we can zoom in on the background and see if the fence shows up, and it kind of disappears in both images. Here's a train. The RIF6 Cube colors are slightly more saturated. And this one we'll zoom in on to compare the details. And here's a lit up balloon in the sky. Notice the difference in the clouds. And some fireworks in a dark sky. Fairly similar image quality between the two projectors. And our final image, a night scene with some stars in the sky. The RIF6 Cube has better contrast. And if we zoom in, we can see the details in the stars. Next, we'll compare the DBPower T20 budget projector to a full-size name brand BenQ projector that's rated at 2000 lumen. You'll learn in some of my other reviews that the name brand 2000 lumen projectors are actually many times brighter than the so-called 2000 lumen budget projectors that sell on Amazon for under $150. Here's a quick brightness comparison between the sub $100 DBPower T20 budget projector with a claimed rating of 1800 lumen and the name brand BenQ projector rated at 2000 lumen. From this picture, it's clear that the claims of cheap knockoffs are not always true. I think you'd agree the BenQ projector on the right is much more than 10% brighter than the budget projector on the left. The same holds true for the quality of your projector screen. Here's a quick comparison between a cheap $30 Spandex projector screen made in China on the right and an $80 Spandex projector screen made in the USA on the left. As you can see, it's worth spending a bit more for the higher quality image you'll get. With that being said, you will remember from the beginning of this video I showed you that I was projecting these images onto a white Spandex projector screen. However, if you want to use your projector in a room that's not totally dark, or if you want to use it outside, like in your backyard for an outdoor movie, or take it camping or to a party or something, there are two things you may want to consider: a brighter projector and the darker silver Spandex projector screen. Even though the silver screen looks quite a bit darker than the white screen, it'll actually give you a nice bright image with more contrast, which is especially useful when you can't get an environment that's completely dark, such as being outside with a full moon or if there's streetlights nearby. Now, the other benefit of the darker silver Spandex screen is that you won't have to wash it as often if you accidentally drop it on the ground, because you won't notice dirt as much on the darker fabric. But keep in mind, if the Spandex screen does get dirty, you can just throw it in the washer using cool water and then dry it for 10 to 15 minutes in the dryer and it's good as new. That's not as easy with some other types of projector screens. And finally, you'll remember when I showed you the rear projection ability of the white Spandex projector screen. Well, the silver screen has that same ability. Okay, let's continue with our BenQ comparison. Here you can see the size comparison between the DBPower T20 budget projector with a claimed brightness of 1800 lumen and a resolution of 800 by 480, and the full-size name brand BenQ W1070 projector with a brightness of 2000 lumen and a higher 1920 by 1080 resolution. Our first comparison here is a simple white image to compare the brightness. As you can see, the so-called 1800 lumen DBPower T20 budget projector is nowhere near as bright as the 2000 lumen name brand BenQ projector. And now let's zoom in to compare the pixels. And next we have some basic colored squares with the BenQ being much brighter. And you may want to pause on this image. This is the actual lumen measurement of each color. This was done in a completely dark room as opposed to a dimly lit room like all our other slides were shot in. And we'll zoom in to compare the color pixels. Next we'll compare some basic color gradients. You'll notice the BenQ, the transition between the colors is much smoother. And here we have some colored smoke on the white background. Zooming in, we can see much more detail from the high resolution BenQ. and smoke on a black background. Zooming in on this one, you can see the drastic difference in details. Here's a basic color gradient, and zooming in, we'll compare the detail here. Here you can see the shadow details are much better from the BenQ projector, and the highlights are better as well. Here the shadow details once again are better from the BenQ, and zooming in you can see the drastic difference there. And here you see better shadows and highlights in this image from the BenQ. Here's a gradient, much better resolution from the BenQ projector, and zooming in you can see the big difference there. Here's another grid pattern. BenQ looks much better once again, and zooming in you can see the big difference. Here's some black grids on a white background. Zooming in we can see the grid pattern is much better from the BenQ. And a white grid on a black background. Zooming in we'll see the same difference in quality here. Here the text is much more legible from the BenQ projector. Zooming in you can see the difference. And the skin tones are brighter and better from the BenQ. We can see the detail, the faces are sharper as well. Here's another comparison of faces for skin tone, and we'll zoom in on this one. And the colors are much brighter from the BenQ projector, and the details are better as well. Here's a similar image for comparison. Here you really see the brightness difference between the two projectors. And here again the brightness is much brighter from the BenQ. And once again the details are much better from the BenQ as well as we zoom in to see that. Here's a nice high contrast image, and zooming in you can see the difference in quality. Here you can see how much more contrast the BenQ has, and zooming in it's sharper as well. Here we can see much better shadow details from the BenQ, and look at the pyramid how much sharper it is. Here's a good sunset scene for comparison, and a night shot. Zooming in, notice the detail on the bridge, and notice the fence in the background, how much more detail you pick up from the BenQ projector. And when we zoom in on this image, you will see how much sharper the higher resolution BenQ is. Here's a nice night shot of a balloon and some fireworks. The fine line details are much better from the BenQ, and our final image, compare the stars in the sky. Zooming in you can see the big difference there. So my final advice is as follows. If you're always going to be using your projector in a totally dark room, then the brightness isn't as important as the resolution. It'd be better to get a dimmer projector with a higher resolution. So if your viewing environment isn't totally dark, such as a room with windows and you don't have blackout curtains during the day, or you're outside where there may be street lights or a glowing moon, then you'll want to go with a brighter projector. But remember that cheap projectors are almost never as bright as they claim to be. And as far as resolution goes, I would typically pick a less bright projector with a higher resolution over a brighter projector with a lower resolution. You can always try to make your room darker, but you'll never be able to increase the resolution of your projector. I personally would never get a projector with a resolution below 720p, which is a resolution of 1280 pixels across by 720 pixels high. The reason for this is that you'll most likely be enlarging the video to about 9 feet across, and at that size you can actually see the individual pixels on lower resolution projectors. I think a 1080p projector is about the highest resolution you'd need, as a 4K projector doesn't really add all that much to the picture quality for the much higher price you'd be paying. Here's a screenshot from a YouTube video that compares a 4K projector versus a 180p projector. It's being projected onto a wall, but even so, there's really not much difference between the quality. As far as sound goes, I would recommend an external speaker of some sort, as most projectors that I've come across under $500 do not have great sound quality. But I will say I was fairly impressed with the sound I got from the soda can-sized Nebula capsule. You'll also want to consider if you'd like a portable projector that can run on batteries as opposed to a projector that has to be plugged into the wall. The portability of the smaller projectors is always nice, but keep in mind that the battery life is almost always under 2 hours. But it is not limited to running on the battery only. You can always plug it in for unlimited runtime. As far as portable projectors go, I really like the AXA brand. The P300, P700, and M5 projectors have a fairly high resolution, nice colors, and good brightness. The Nebula capsule also produces a decent image with a really good speaker, but it does have a lower resolution than the 3 AXA projectors. Alright everybody, thanks for your time. I hope you found this video informative, and if you think others would find it helpful, please click the thumbs up button, which makes it easier for them to find it. And also don't forget to click on the links for the Spandex projector screens below in the description, and check back for more projector comparison videos coming up soon. Thanks for watching.